name is Steve Butz. I'm an assistant professor of Spanish and Latin American literature here at IPFW, and I am also director of the university's UC2 initiative, or University Community Conversation. The University Community Conversation is an initiative that's sponsored by the Institute for Research, Scholarship, and Creative Endeavors here at IPFW, and our goal is to bring together faculty expertise, community expertise, and students to plan public events around topics of interest in Northeast Indiana. So without further ado, I will pass the word to our panelists, have them introduce themselves, and then we'll start the event. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Professor Cepeda. I am an associate professor here of Spanish, and I'm very thankful to Professor Butz for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I'll let everybody else introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Raquel L Klein, and I am a board member of the Fort Wayne Museum of Art and also a member of the committee that plans the celebration of Day of the Dead at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. And I also the director of the Language Services Network, which is an organization that provides translation and interpretations to the community in Fort Wayne.
My name is Juan Navarro. I work at the Center for Nonviolence. I graduated 2014 at IPFW, master's in psychology and a minor in Spanish.
Yay! Okay, I'm going to begin the presentation by providing and contextualizing the Day of the Dead from a scholarly perspective, and I'll go over to the podium. So the Day of the Dead. It's a holiday and a celebration that today I'll frame as a Hispanic and Latino within its Hispanic and Latino cultural heritage. Today I mainly will be presenting more of a scholarly, the scholarly aspects of the Day of the Dead, not necessarily the personal aspects. I will provide a background. And my objectives are going to be to provide an overview of the Day of the Dead, to address some popular misconceptions, and frame the holiday within specific cultural practices that must be understood within a regional, national, and historical and religious context. So what is the Day of the Dead? First, I have to address the fact that the Day of the Dead is a misnomer. The name itself isn't necessarily a day. It is multiple days, whether you're talking about the Roman Catholic observance or its indigenous festivity. It isn't a uniform practice among Hispanic, Latinos, or indigenous peoples of Mexico, Central America, or South America. And when does it take place? The Roman Catholic observance takes place over 2 days, November 1st, which is the Solemnity of All Saints, and November 2nd, which is All Souls Day. On November 1st, Catholic observe All Saints Day, and the church honors every saint. The holiday is similar to, if I can make a comparison, of American holidays, perhaps Veterans Day or Memorial Day, when a group of people are honored for sacrifice and selfless action for the benefit of others. All Saints Day is also commemorated by members of the Eastern Orthodox Church, as well as the Anglican and Anglican churches. November 2nd is All Souls Day, and it's dedicated to those who have died and haven't reached heaven, to the souls considered to be in purgatory. The indigenous festivity takes place each year at the end of October to the beginning of November. I would like to note the indigenous festivity, as practiced by the indigenous communities of Mexico, are now part of UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. So, as practiced by the indigenous communities of Mexico, the Day of the Dead commemorates the transitory return to Earth of deceased relatives and loved ones. Okay? The period also marks the completion of the maize cultivation cycle. Let me repeat, the Day of the Dead is for some indigenous groups part of a worldview. Okay? The belief is that the deceased loved ones actually return to visit them on that day. For this reason, families must facilitate their return, and to facilitate their return, they do certain things: the laying of flowers, the lighting of candles, making offerings, cooking favorite dishes, building a shrine in their honor. Families believe that the dead can bring prosperity or misfortune depending on how well they are remembered. So when does the Day of the Dead, what does the Day of the Dead have to do with the cultural artifacts that have become so prevalent in American mainstream? Here we have a slide of things that you can buy at Target. When Americans consume the Day of the Dead, they do so in the forms of skulls, of skeletons, makeup, death costumes, and altars that are more akin to fall or Halloween decor. Here you see, on the left, you see the altar, right? You can buy at Target, you can buy your plates and your candle holders and your wall decors. You can also get your Darth Vader shirt, and underneath it says, "Soy tu padre, I am your father," all for $12.99. When I did a search using Google, I also got these images. On the upper right-hand corner, the image alludes to Katrina, the beautiful female skeleton. The image comes from a tutorial, actually, on how to use Adobe to illustrate a vibrant portrait. The image of the couple underneath is a page dedicated to the Day of the Dead weddings. So if you wanted to marry using this theme, you can go to this website and you can design your cake, your table decor, and they will give you excellent ideas for that, including how the groom and the bride should dress. So this image of Katrina is inspired, it's actually based on this beautiful lady dressed in a fancy floral. Is based on a 1910 etching of Jose Guadalupe Posada, and later it was immortalized by Diego Rivera's Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in La Alameda. The Day of the Dead is a cultural product then that sells well. How do we know? It's an American commodity. Allure last week just published an article on the 5 things to know before doing your Day of the Day of the Dead makeup. And Pinterest has its boards. You can decorate your pumpkin, make ginger cookies, or learn how to do your own fancy makeup. So the Day of the Dead is a widely observed Latino celebration in the United States, but in addition, it has become part of the mainstream, and as such, it is a different practice. When transferred to a secular context, whether it's stores, museums, galleries, community centers, universities, or schools, teachers like to include the Day of the Dead as part of their curriculum in middle school and high school, for example. In this context, the Day of the Dead is transferred from its original folk tradition to a popular practice. What does that mean? For folk arises from an organic life of a community. It is shared belief and it is shared practice. For some indigenous groups in Mexico, Guatemala, Ecuador, and Bolivia, one's well-being depends in part to the respectful remembrance of the dead. It is rooted in a moral obligation. But when the practice is transferred to a secular context, it is commodified for consumption by mass audiences, and in the process, it gains new meanings. It develops because the practice is indirectly tied to an act of devotion and observance. The appropriation creates something new, a cultural use of the Day of the Dead shaped by the people using it, consuming it, creating it, and teaching it. So it is a hybrid form. It is communicating different meanings. It is a new and different cultural use, not a celebration transferred to a new locale. They aren't necessarily Hispanic, Latino, or Amerindian. This appropriation can lead to misconceptions, such as that the Day of the Dead is Hispanic Halloween, or that the Day of the Dead is about costumes or makeup, or that the Day of the Dead is Latin America, is uniform in Latin America, in Spain, and in the United States. But the Day of the Dead is not the product we buy and consume, so it is important to realize that. So what is it? It is an observance for Hispanics, Latinos, and Amerindians. It is a day in which a period in which they remember their loved ones who have passed away. It is a communal tradition, so it is key. What's important is that key of ritual. They visit grave sites, they clean them, they decorate them, they light candles. It's a religious practice. There is prayer to the deceased and for the deceased. So people actually talk to their loved ones who have passed away, and they pray to God for them. Does that make sense? So it is also a cultural expression tied to the historical realities of specific regions. Thus, it's not uniform. To bring these points home, I would like to talk about 3 distinct regions and their observance of the day of the holiday. I would like to provide a picture of different practices by framing them within the personal, the communal, the religious, with the intent of bringing the Day of the Dead back to the social and personal ritual. As I researched the Day of the Dead, I decided to contact people whom I know in Spain and Bolivia. And I met Teresa in grad school. She's now in Santiago de Compostela, near Portugal. And I asked her to talk to us about the Day of the Dead as it is observed in Spain. It's a 2-part little short video. I'll play the first part, talk about it, and then play the second part.
Hi, I'm Teresa from Santiago de Compostela in Galicia, Spain, and I'm going to talk to you about El Día de los Muertos in Spain. Do we celebrate it? Yes, we do. Actually, the 1st of November is a bank holiday here. Nobody has to go to work. But the first thing I have to tell you is that that's not the way we call that day. The 1st of November is El Día de Todos los Santos, and the 2nd of November is the Día de Difuntos.
So Teresa begins by clarifying the difference in name. It may seem small, but it really is an affirmation of culture for her. She ties the celebration to Catholic practice. And here go the second part.
How do we celebrate those days? People basically go to their hometown cemeteries and visit their family graves. They clean them and leave fresh flowers on them. What else do we do? Sometimes we have some small pastries called huesos de santo for dessert. And here in Galicia, we usually eat chestnuts. It used to be the staple food before we imported the potato from America. So there are many chestnut trees. So in October and November, people get together to roast chestnuts and eat them. And we call those celebrations magostos. But that's not directly related to Día de Difuntos or Todos los Santos. It's just something we do here. And what else do we do? It's not really a fun celebration here, but people like Halloween, the American Halloween. So on the 31st of October, children and teenagers, or some of them, get dressed or put on scary costumes, and some of them go trick-or-treating, but it's just an imitation of the American Halloween. But what I can tell you is that Galicia has Celtic heritage. So we have been reclaiming Samain, which is the Celtic celebration of the end of the harvest season. So we tell the children at schools about it, but we don't celebrate it in any certain way. We just have fun with the Halloween American tradition.
So in this second video, something begins to arise, and it's going to be the commonalities of the practice. And she mentions visiting cemeteries, bringing flowers, offerings, and eating a dessert called hueso de santos, which means saint bones. They also eat chestnuts, right? Because that is much more, it's a part of Galicia. And they are also beginning to bring back some of the Celtic practices, and with that, then an observance of harvest. Notice she also emphasizes that the celebration is not fun. The tone is somber and respectful. I'll come back to that point. I would like to contrast this observation to the one shared by another friend of mine who lives in Bolivia. I also asked her to share information about the character that the celebration takes for her and her family, but she'd rather not talk about herself. She wanted to talk about Quillacas. Quillacas is a small town in Oruro. You see the big red line, big red arrow. And she described Quillacas in the following way. She says, Quillacas is a town taken as if it was from Juan Rulfo's stories. Juan Rulfo is a Mexican author who writes about, who represents poverty and harshness, not only in the experience of its characters, but also of the environment. The people suffer a lot, and at the end, there's no happy ending in Rulfo's stories. So she talks about this town being like Rulfo's stories, and she says there's little water, no vegetation, and it's cold and a very dry atmosphere. And she described it with the adjective, it's just horrible. So the only thing that keeps the few inhabitants that still live in this town is the importance of their dead. The idea of leaving is inadmissible to them because of the strong ties they keep to their dead. And she writes, and this is a quote, the night of the 1st of November, they exhume their dead in the morning, they feed them breakfast, and spend the day talking to them, telling them what happened that year. And they do so amid food, candles, and flowers. Fabi says that the practice is a bit morbid, but she found it also interesting. She says that in the afternoon, they bury them again, and they light candles, and then they go home. What emerges out of this practice in Quillaca is that contact with the dead. A reinstatement of a link that isn't lost because death has happened, but it is a sense of continuity, a shared belief that the dead really do come back, and in Quillacas, they actually bring them back. I would like to discuss one more place, and that's Pamuc in Campeche, Mexico. Pamuc was founded by the Mayans in the 15th century. It was originally named Tixpocmuc. Tix is onomatopoeic and is a word that refers to the dripping or running water. It creates the sound much. Creates the sound of a toad when it's falling into a water. So the name is where toads swim or splash. For the Mayans, frogs or toads are tied to Shak, the god of rain. Today, Pamuc is a town of 8,695 inhabitants. A total of 2,831 of them speak Mayan still today. So when loved ones pass, the Pamuc place the body in a coffin. They move it to a cemetery, then they place it in a niche sealed with cement, and it's above ground, so you can see it's above ground. The body remains there for 2 to 3 years, at which time the coffin is taken out, the corpse is aired, and the residual soft tissue is removed, and the body is ventilated. These are called holy remains, and they're later placed in wooden boxes, with embroidered blankets, adorned with floral motifs with the names of the deceased. The bones are then placed in ossuaries in no specific order, but the skull is always on top. These ossuaries are are placed in niches shared with other family members. Every year on the last day of October, the people in Pamuc go to the cemetery for the ceremony of cleaning the skeletal remains and changing their clothes. So they actually take the bones out, they hold the bones of their loved ones, and they clean them. They redecorate, they paint, and this is the way they celebrate it. So during these days, the villagers gather together. So you see the villagers doing the same thing in the cemeteries, doing this common ritual, and they carefully attend to the remains of their dead relatives. It is also a practice that they offer food, and in Mayan, it's called Janan Pishan. Janal means food or stew, and Pishan is soul or spirit that gives life to a man's body. So for the people of Pamuc, October 31st It's a little different also. They believe that that's when children visit them. On November 1st, it's when adults arrive. And then November 2nd, then it's the saints. So when we think about Quillacas and Pomo, they serve as Amerindian examples of the practice of the Day of the Dead. And perhaps listening to these two practices as a people with a different cultural background, we can judge them, their difference. It can impact us because we inevitably process that information from our own experiences. But we must remember that the aboriginal people of the Americas, the Aztecs, the Mayan, the Olmecs, the Mixtecs, Zapotecs, Aymaras, the Quechuas, have a different worldview regarding the dead. So it is for them it was important to retain harmony between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They believe that the spirits of the dead and the deities are always present among us and to be cared for. So that they can be ensured personal and communal well-being. So how you treat their dead, how they treat their dead, is also comes back to them. So Christian European view of death is simply different from the pre-Columbian cultures of Latin America. At the time of colonization, Christian Europe's medieval view of death was of anguish, of death. So you should think of the Grim Reaper. But for indigenous people, the afterworld was desirable. You could visit your relatives once you were dead. For this reason, their tone is different. So their tone is one of celebration, and they believe of reunion, so people can come together. Since the 1890s, Mexican-American families in the U.S. Southwest have observed the Day of the Dead. It was done so in conjunction with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. So they cleaned the graves, decorated them, attended Mass, which is obligatory for Catholics on All Saints' Day. So it is not until the 1970s that the U.S. begins to celebrate the Day of the Dead with the tones that we recognize today. It was not an indigenous practice at its beginning here in the United States. It was mainly Roman and Roman Catholic. So what changed? The Day of the Dead that we know today in the U.S. emerges as part of the Chicano movement. It was part of social justice activism. It was comprised of Mexican-American artists and intellectuals who were inspired by Black civil rights activism, American Indian movement, women's liberation. And the aim of the Chicano movement was to promote farm workers' rights, fight for Native American land rights, seek education opportunities, and voting rights. And one of their objectives was to confront negative stereotypes in the mainstream. So as part of this movement, they create protest art. And this is done to create political transformation and to affirm their own identity, their Chicano identity. So the rituals imported had more of a pre-Columbian character. The Catholic religious aspects of the rituals were omitted, such as the praying of the rosary. From time to time, you'll see a cross, but it's just part of the decoration. Chicanos wanted to distance themselves from a religion linked to colonialism for them. And most of the young Chicanos involved in the early exhibits in the 1970s were also no longer Catholic. So these new practices reflected a Chicano spirituality, and they included something different. They included Aztec dance. They included dancing as prayer. Altar installations were showcased. And the intent was a cultural affirmation of Chicano identity and politics. Thus, this hybrid practice, much like our present-day practice popularized in the U.S., was simply different than what's observed the Day of the Dead with the worldview regarding death. So what is the Day of the Dead then? For us in the United States, right, we can buy it. We can do marathons and dress the part. But how can we begin to educate ourselves about the holiday in a way that is mindful and respectful of its cultural background? I would ask you to compare more to Memorial Day. The Day of the Dead is a respectful remembrance of loved ones who have passed away. And it is a felt obligation to remember and also to give thanks. And sometimes that comes with joy, or it can come with a somber tone, and that is, again, defined by personal practice or according to the region. So, okay, thank you. We're going to move to Raquel Klein, who will talk to us about the way that the Day of the Dead is practiced here in Fort Wayne in the Museum of Art.
So the Museum of Art has been putting together the Day of the Dead celebration, or Dia de los Muertos, for the past 6 years. And the reason why the celebration came to the museum is because of the growing demographics in our community. So as you can imagine, we have a large Latino community, mostly Mexicans, but we have representation from other countries from Latin America. So there was a need, a consensus from some of the board members and the committee from the community to talk to the board of the Museum of Arts and express our commitment to the culture and the demographics and do something in relation to the Day of the Dead. And that's how the museum decided it was a good step into celebrating the cultures that are represented in our community. So we are now in the 6th year of the celebration. We have a lot of participations from people from the community, schools, organizations, individuals that like to come and celebrate the celebration. As Carla was mentioning, the celebration has a different meaning for everyone. So for some people, it's their way of honoring someone that they love. For some other people, it's honoring an artist or a writer or a person that they really had an impact on their life. So it depends on the person the way they want to celebrate it. But what we try to do is emphasize the cultural aspect. Even though we live in the United States, it's also important to go back to the roots. So when we ask people to submit their applications, we emphasize that it has to meet certain criteria, and that is that it has to have certain elements that are traditional to the altars that are done in Mexico. So we do have a lot of people in the committee that is very knowledgeable as far as the culture, the history, and we are always willing to help the people that are setting up the altars with information and giving them keys on how to build a proper altar. So that's what, as far as the preparations, so we do have a committee that is formed for about, it's been 6 years, so there's 12 people in the committee, but some people sometimes can come and go, and so some drop, some continue, but there's a core committee that is 4 members that have been together for the past 6 years. And the support for the museum is just exceptional because they have opened the doors to the community, and as you can imagine, putting an event of this magnitude together takes a lot of work, and it's a lot of money and time, and we do, thank the community that supports these sorts of activities, because it's through sponsorships that we are able to do this event and free of charge, because the event is free to the public and you don't have to pay to come. So let me see. Right now we're working with the schools, because now, as Carla was presenting her information, Day of the Dead is more mainstream now. It's not seen as something that is weird, that is witchcraft, as a lot of people have asked questions in regards of that. And we're working with the schools very closely as far as raising awareness about the cultural context and why it is important that the people that have Latino roots learn the culture, and also the people that live here learn what the Day of the Dead is about. This is not the Mexican Halloween, as Carla was saying. This is actually a sacred tradition that to this point is almost being a little bit of a cultural appropriation, and we're still kind of dealing with those issues. That is a fine line that is really hard to have a conversation or a dialogue in regards of that, because it's really difficult. So, but we're trying to encourage the community to come and learn about what the Day of the Dead is. So I open the invitation to you guys. We will be having the celebration on October 30th, and it will be a family celebration, and it starts from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we didn't have enough time to do 2 days, so we are combining the Dia de los Niños, which is Day of the Dead for the children, and the family day. So we're combining the 2 celebrations all together. So we will have an area for children with activities that they can decorate masks, skulls, marshmallows. They can do also paper flowers and other things that are meaningful to the celebration of the Day of the Dead. And we will also have entertainment. We will have live music and the different displays, altars that are being put together by the different members in the community. So please come and enjoy yourselves and learn about the culture. There's going to be a lot of us, members of the committee, available if you have questions and if you would like to get involved in, being part of this celebration. Because what we want is to bring the community together through events like this. So, thank you.
So, as I mentioned, my name is Juan. I'm going to talk about Dia de los Muertos on a personal level. Growing up, that wasn't something I've always celebrated. It wasn't until recently, as it's become more visible in America, that we've really tried to go back to the roots and practicing it on an individual level. So it's been up until recently that my family has really been celebrating Day of the Dead. And what my mother does is she has an altar or a table, and she puts like a tablecloth. She puts pictures of all our deceased loved ones, and what she makes is empanadas, which are bread that are stuffed with fruit or jelly, and we have other foods that family members may have enjoyed. Me personally, on a personal level, I have like a little altar as well for my brother who has passed away, and a best friend that also passed away. And what I try to do is put things that they enjoyed, having things that they also liked. Both of them, surprisingly, both loved coffee, so I can do that, and that's easy to do. But as Carla had mentioned, going to the graveyards on Day of the Dead, with me and my family, what we do, it's not necessarily going to the grave, as far as my brother who passed away and has a grave here, which is difficult to travel to other graves. But what we do is we usually clean, the grave, and change the flowers as the seasons change, having autumn type of decor, then Christmas type of decor, and then a summer type of decor. So as the seasons change, we try to clean and make sure that it's seasonal appropriate. So yeah, like I said, it's been something recent and new for myself, but once again, it's to honor and to remember the people that have passed away. It's a way of thinking about them. Although they're not here physically, we can still remember them and remember the memory and remember the joy that we've had with family members and friends. So.
Thank you. Is there any questions that you would like to discuss?
Sure.
No question. Okay. So now I will open it to questions from you guys if you have any.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, head on down to the microphone here, if you don't mind, just so we can hear you for the rebroadcast. I also want to draw attention to the altar that we have in the back, prepared by our Club de Español, prepared by Heather Bond, the president, and some of the other club members. So it is a representation of something that you could see at the Museum of Art when you go to the celebration. And Raquel, what was the date of the celebration?
October 30th.
October 30th from 2 to 6. So you guys can take a look and speak with Heather about the relatives that are remembered on the altar. So if anybody has any questions for Dr. Cepeda, for Raquel, or for Juan, come on down.
This is for Juan. You mentioned that growing up, you didn't practice this at home. Did just one day mom say, you know what, let's do this starting today? Because I know for me, it didn't start until till I was an adult, and my children were actually teenagers, that I said, you know, I'm going to go back and do this, because as a child, my parents didn't practice this either. And then I just thought one day, why not? And now my daughter and I have a tradition, and now my grandson and my daughter and I go and take care of my father's gravesite. So is it something that just, you know, maybe your mom did it for a little bit and then now everybody else does it, or just one day, hey, let's do this year?
It's a good question. So what my mother has done, because, you know, coming from a culturally Roman Catholic family, what my mother has done in the past, you know, we always pray, you know, the anniversary of someone's passing, we've prayed a rosary. It wasn't something that I practiced personally growing up. It's not that it never happened, it's just something that wasn't practiced. I think once other people, maybe in the community, and as it became more visible, I think it started being more in practice. And personally as well, we didn't do this because we didn't have a lot of family members that passed. But then a while back, you know, an uncle passed, a cousin passed, my brother passed, my grandmother passed, my grandfather passed. A lot of people passed. So then, you know, just to honor those people that have passed, you know, we started practicing this and going back to the roots and the cultural aspect of it.
Okay, I really didn't want to come all the way up here because this makes me nervous, but my question is regarding kind of like the cultural appropriation of the holiday, because on the one hand, I feel like, you know, the cultural appropriation of the Day of the Dead in, you know, America, for example, is offensive because we do lose sight of kind of the original meaning of the holiday. But on the other hand, I feel like as we become more globalized, it's kind of inevitable. So I guess, how do we observe the holiday in a way that is like respectful, and like where do you draw that line, and how do you make that like choice of like, you know, is what I'm doing like, you know, respectful to the culture, or is this like not okay? You know what I mean? So that's my question.
Very good one. Anybody? Okay, I'll do it.
I can add to that.
You can add, okay, but I'm going first. I think the appropriation of the Day of the Dead has an element of offensiveness, like you say, right, when it is completely sold, as you see at Target, right? And it is practice, I think, devoid of its cultural background. Nonetheless, globalization, right, makes that cultural, that transculturation a reality, which means that you have a practice that is from one culture transferred to another culture, it will take a different character. And I think that as you come in contact with other people and other people appropriate it, it will become a new product, right? It becomes a new expression. And I think it's a personal, how do you draw the line? I believe it's a personal choice. You have to make the choice, you can choose to be educated and practice it as respectfully as you can, right? We all have someone that has passed away. We all, it could be an actor or actress that you loved. It doesn't need to be part of your family. So you can observe it about that. You can observe it based on some death, a political death, right? There's an aspect in political culture, something that's dying, so you build an altar for it. In fact, in Mexico, the Day of the Dead has a political aspects to it. In fact, in the Mexican papers around November 1st, November 2nd, this poetry come out that they're called calaveras, and they make fun of political figures. So it really is a way to question something that they don't agree with politically. So I didn't touch upon that, so there's a lot to it. So I would say it's a personal choice, and then also an acceptance, right? That that as we become globalized, we will end up absorbing new things that we will make our own, and I believe they're right. As we make it our own. Like I teach Spanish, right? I realize that when I teach Spanish, the language that is mine, that I speak at home, that I learned from my family, that I learned in another country, it's not the one that I teach my students, but it's still a beautiful communication that my students will learn and express in a new context. So I would say what's true for language, it's also true for culture.
And just like I said before, we did have some disagreement as well, with some people as far as, is this something that we are appropriating, or is this something that is more based on the cultural roots and what we're celebrating? So it's just like Carla was saying, it's a fine line, and as long as you do your research and you know that you're respecting what the significance of that celebration is, I think it's acceptable, because I think from any cultures, we always end up appropriating something. So we live in a world where we appreciate cultures, we appreciate art from different countries. So there's not always going to be, and that's why I hate labels when they say it's cultural appropriation, it's this and that, because we live in a world. We need to learn how to live with each other and learn from everyone, as long as we respect the traditions and the values from, where that tradition is coming from.
I agree. I think it's a choice, and you just have to be respectful and mindful of the roots of it. A lot of cultures, different cultures, respect ancestors and respect people that have passed away. And as mentioned, in the next few years, this could be totally different than what it originally was. And what it comes down is to how you do this. How do you find that balance of respectful and yet choosing to do this? Because you don't want to mock the origins of it. You don't want to mock people that do this and take this seriously. And you don't want to be disrespectful of, wearing it as a costume and just having fun, which, once again, it's personal choice, but what it comes down to is just how do you respectfully honor your loved ones.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Well, I actually just have a couple questions. First off, how long does that last, the whole Dia de los Muertos thing? Is it just like a one-day thing, or is it like a month long where they drag it out? And also, can you tell us about what are some of the rituals that they do during this day? Like those parades where they go around with candy? And one more thing, did you guys have any candy? Actual
Exactly.
candy for that? You know what I'm talking about, right? Alfiniques?
You
know what that is?
We have some. Do we have food up there?
I'm talking about the real ones. Do you guys have any, like for us to see and for me to take?
There's pan de muerto up there,
So no?
no.
Okay.
We failed you today.
I know. Well, I was just-
With the candy, we failed you with the candy.
I was
But
just
we can,
wondering.
I could do something about the other questions, just not the candy.
Okay. Go ahead.
Excellent. When is the Day of the Dead? The Roman Catholic holidays, November 1st and November 2nd. The indigenous observance is at the conclusion of October, November 1st and November 2nd. When the Spaniards and the Roman Catholic tradition came to the New World, they tried to evangelize and convert indigenous people and try to have them accept the Roman Catholic practice of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. It was hard. The missionaries tried really hard to teach the indigenous people how to observe the saints and how to develop a new understanding of the dead. But it is part of who they are. It is part of their belief system that the dead come back at the end of October, first days of November, and they join us here. So the second part of your question was the rituals. I omitted talking about the rituals, and you guys want to talk about the rituals? You want to talk about some of the rituals and the food?
I can add a little bit. Well, I grew up in Nicaragua, so the way we celebrated was not the same way they celebrated in Mexico. That's why I'm so fascinated with the way it's celebrated in Mexico. For us, it was very simple. We just went to the cemetery to take flowers and spend the day there with our deceased loved ones, and that was about it, and just attend Mass. But it was very simple. It was never a celebration of life. It was just, we come here just to pay tribute, to say that we still remember you, but not, the way that is celebrated in Mexico, which is just a celebration of life, welcoming the person coming to be there with you and making, it's like a big party. It's just fascinating.
Everyone celebrates it differently, I think, depending on what town you're from, the beliefs that you have, the rituals that you do or don't do. For my family, as I mentioned before, we have foods, and we put those foods on the altar because we believe that we're giving offering to the people. So we can have pan de muerto, we can have empanadas, we can have pozole, we can have mole, we can have whatever foods, the people that passed away loved. So that's how, at least from my personal aspect, that's how we celebrate it. There's different other rituals. I'm sure as the days get closer to the days of Dia de los Muertos, there'll be coverage on Univision and Telemundo maybe, and there's different ways of how they celebrate it in different parts of the world too.
And the candy you were referring to is alfeñique, is that what you said? Alfeñique. And you called it the real candy. So no, you did. But I think it's important that you say that because it conveys, I think, your own personal experience and affirmation. I think it conveys your experience. And with that, I think a strong sense of what authentic is. And that is true for you, and I think it is correct for you. The candy is made of something, I looked it up, but I have trouble with names of like plants. So it looks like quinoa. It's not quinoa. So it looks like quinoa. And then the candy, it was a practice among some indigenous communities. I mean, there's a whole ritual about how to produce it. The thing is, it's important to remember that not all indigenous groups also observe the Day of the Dead the way I talked about it, even though I talked about indigenous communities. I mentioned some. So it was more like the Aztecs and the Mayans. Not necessarily, for instance, the Incas. So it's not a blanket at all indigenous groups of Latin America practice it the same way. With that, then, the ritual of food is just, it is honestly varied. I did not omit it because, in a way, I'm sorry, I chose to omit the food because I thought that to talk about food when it came to the Day of the Dead would be to support more of the stereotype of Hispanics and food that sells so well also, right? Like if you see it in films, right? If any Latino film, there's like, there is a lady cooking and it's all about the food. So I did not want to come in here and talk to you about food by choice. Any more questions?
Okay, I'm kind of embarrassed, but I don't know a lot about the Day of the Dead. I pretty much know from the cartoons I watch with my son, which are probably somewhat inaccurate. So I was wondering, it goes back to what she was saying and not wanting to be disrespectful, but at the same time in Mexico, they do makeup and they do costumes and they do rituals. What does that represent for them? Why do they do that? That's it.
Any idea on the makeup?
I don't have any ideas on the makeup. I think that's just the way that it's celebrated. It's just, as Carla was explaining, the whole idea of the makeup, I believe, but don't quote me on that, is from the Guadalupe Posada, the Catrinas.
Yeah.
So they're mocking the high society, the Spaniards that used to live in Mexico during, 19, I don't know, you can help in 1920s. So it was like the high society people. So what they're doing is just mocking the people. That's why they dress up in, the beautiful dresses and have the skeletons. But it's just making a reference on Guadalupe Posada work that he did on the Catherine and Katrina, which is mocking the couple, the man and the female. And,
Another aspect is that Posada criticized the upper Mexican culture that forgot its indigenous roots. With that, the idea that there's something we have in common, regardless of our differences and social differences, and that is death as the ultimate democratic process, right? We don't know if we're gonna be born, but for sure that we will die. That's death as the ultimate democratic process. But for Posada, it was a criticism of people in Mexico that reject their indigenous roots. That at the end they are native too, so it probably is also that idea of that coexistence of life and death, and it comes across in the makeup, right? It's the coexistence. It's life and death together, always present. And I think for Americans, we tend to ignore it. It's hard to talk about death. Today we're talking about death so openly, but for Americans, there is a level of taboo. For in other cultures, because we talk about our dead, our loved ones who have passed away, death and life are part of it. When I was born, my grandfather had been dead for at least 15 years. Let me tell you that my father reminded me about my grandfather just about every year, and he would say, "Today is the day Grandpa passed away." And then and now my grandmother passed away, his mother, and now I know every month. I'm like, "Dad, please." I know she passed away. It's hard, but it is, I think, that coexistence of life and death. You remember your loved ones who have passed away, and they become part of your story. And the makeup, then, I think that coexistence. And it's gorgeous makeup, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really pretty.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, I've studied Katrina from a historical perspective, or at least in the picture from Diego Rivera, but
Yeah.
I still don't have the background that you will have from the culture and everything like that.
So, yeah,
Interesting.
thank you. Any more questions?
If there are no questions, let's give a round of applause to our panelists.